All right, I think we are recording. So welcome, Eileen, to the Celebration Effect community. We're so happy to have you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you do and how you help people?
Okay, great. My name's Eileen Barker, and I am the founder of the Path of Forgiveness, which is on the web at thepathoforgiveness.com. And it's really devoted to teaching people how to forgive. So I'm a forgiveness teacher, and I'm very passionate about forgiveness and the role it can play in enhancing really all areas of our life, but especially the hard ones. And so I think it has particular, power for the places where we struggle, but it's just such an enhancement, and it's so important really for everybody. And it's also very misunderstood often. So my passion is educating people, and then it comes down to teaching people how to forgive, because in the end, that's really what a lot of times where we get stuck. Well, okay, I'm convinced and I should and I want to, but how do I do it? So that's really the essence of my work. I lead retreats, I lead classes, I teach people how to meditate. I do a lot of things that support the path of forgiveness. I do think it's a life path. It's not, it can be like a one-time event and you forgive, but really it's an attitude and it's a way of approaching life ultimately that I think really makes the difference. So I'm really happy to be here to share with you today.
Oh, awesome. Well, and again, I mentioned before, but we have some construction going on, so I'm going to keep myself muted whenever you're talking.
Okay.
But so tell us about how you got into this whole idea of forgiveness. How does one become like a forgiveness coach, and kind of what's your story on that?
Great question. Well, my story is that I actually, in my career, started out as a lawyer, believe it or not, the farthest thing you could think of in a way. And I was litigating. So, I was involved in really difficult cases where people are fighting with each other. And I didn't like it. And I decided I didn't want to do that. So I became a mediator. And I loved helping people come together and, achieve peace when possible, but settle their cases. And so it was as a mediator that I started realizing that, even when people settle their cases, they often are still very angry at each other. They often still mistrust each other. And I started wondering, what does it take? What does it take for us if we've been in conflict or had a hard situation or a divorce or something to actually move into being peaceful and having, peace in our hearts? And I thought, because that's what I wanted for my clients. I didn't just want them to leave still being angry. And so I started exploring forgiveness, and this was about 20 years ago. And I started learning about it, and I started understanding that that really was the missing piece, that until we forgive, that conflict, whatever it is, it's not really over. But when we do forgive, it can be transformative. And that's how I got into it. And when I saw the power of forgiveness, it really hooked me, basically. It was like, okay, this is it. This is the missing ingredient. And this, so that was my path. Now for other people, I actually, I do teach forgiveness, and I coach people privately. And now I'm in the 5th year of a program where other people who want to become forgiveness coaches, I train them. And so that's really exciting to me, because I want more forgiveness in the world. And the way to do that is to have more people who know how to help others and more coaches. So that's, like I said, the program is in its 5th year, and, has attracted like amazing people who really get it and they want to help others. And so that's how you become a forgiveness coach.
That's so awesome. Well, that's so interesting that you say that, because I recently had kind of a legal situation. I think some of the ladies in the membership kind of know about it. And man, that is it's so hard to like not be so angry. Do you feel like when you teach people how to forgive, once they kind of learn like the process and things like that, do you feel like people get better at like being able to forgive more quickly, or do we still need to give ourselves like grace in terms of like giving ourselves time to forgive, or what are your thoughts on that?
Those are both really accurate statements. I think the first time you go through, you learn the process. And I developed a process. It's got 12 steps in it. So when I'm working with somebody or someone comes to a retreat, we guide them through the process. And that, by the way, is laid out in a workbook that is freely available online on my website. It's called the Forgiveness Workbook. It's like a self-guided. Yeah, so that's a great tool. And so people use that, but then they also sometimes come for help, because when we're in a hard conflict, you know, we do have blind spots, and it can really help to have somebody else help us. But once you've gone through the process and you know the steps, it does get easier to not get hooked or to unhook yourself the next time. But that said, we're still human. It still takes time, and we still have to give ourselves space to go through what we need to go through, and forgiveness can't be rushed. And sometimes, you know, there's a time and place where we need to be angry, and we need to work through those feelings, and then you can get, and you know, it's very individual. Some people that takes a long time, and then they're ready to let it go. And some people really don't, they want to let it go right away, and they just, you know, so that's very individual, but it's really a personal choice. And I never tell anybody, hey, you should forgive, because I think that's up to you, the person, to say, I want to, can you help me? Sure. But we have to come to that ourselves. And usually it's because it's like we've suffered enough. We want our life back, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Well, so then is there a difference between like forgiveness and compassion, and also what about, I mean, legally, and then also kind of in what's going on in the world right now, you know, is there such thing as justice when it comes to forgiveness? Like, maybe there's too many questions, but.
A lot of questions, but they're all good ones. And I want to say that I feel very strongly that forgiveness does not negate the need for justice, which we also need. And I'm a real proponent of what's called restorative justice, where you really want to achieve justice, but you want to do it in a way where there's repair, not just being punitive, which our system has more been based on historically. But there is a big movement now for a new approach, which is restorative. And that requires people to be accountable, to tell the truth about what happened. And if they've harmed somebody else, to acknowledge it. And sometimes, you know, apologies, and sometimes, but it's really the acknowledgement, you know, that when somebody says, hey, I did do this, and I'm owning up to it, that's very healing. We need that. And then also repair if you've caused harm. So I don't think forgiveness gives you a free pass on any of that, because we have a very deep need for that restoration. I don't necessarily love the word justice, because it's got a lot of baggage with it, and with that, like an eye for an eye, which is not really, but repair, yes, and accountability. And a lot of people really aren't up for that, and they don't, you know, as we know, they don't show up for that. But I think that it's important that we create processes that are more compassionate, so that, I mean, I think a person is more likely to show up when they feel they're not going to be hammered, and there's going to be compassion for them too, because we all mess up. But, you know, we're in like an old system trying to move into a new system. So we're kind of in the middle of that, I would say.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, like going through what I went through with the legal thing, I've struggled a little bit, and I'm sure people struggle with this too. It's like, you know, we have the opportunity to like seek a legal situation where we could sue. It was a realtor type of situation. And I feel like I'm torn between, should I not go forward with that, because should I just be forgiving and letting go, you know? So I feel a little torn with that situation.
It's interesting. Well, you might want both, you know, you really might want both, and you have to assess. I think, you know, there are times when you need a legal solution. There are times when you need a judge to tell somebody, hey, you need to, you know, sometimes you need that, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes, you know, I do mediation now, still a lot of divorce mediation. So I really am privy to all the things that people are able to do on their own without an authority, but it requires two people who are showing up in good faith, and you don't always have that. And when you don't have that, sometimes you just, so what I would say in that case is that and this is an important point about forgiveness, is that if you're, and I don't know your situation, so I'm not being too, I can't be too specific, but if you're in a situation where the other person is not showing up and being accountable or acknowledging what they've done, you still can forgive them. So one of the things about my brand of forgiveness, I call it unilateral forgiveness. It's like people will say, well, you know, he'll never apologize, or it's not about for him. You're going to do this for yourself. What you're, the work you would be doing, and this, because sometimes forgiveness is, okay, I forgive you. So I wouldn't do that with that person. They haven't earned it. But you have the right to release the anger, because why should you carry it all around? That's toxic for you. So that's one of the things I learned along, you know, when I started exploring forgiveness, is that when we carry anger and grudges and resentment, it's really damaging to our health. And so the person who's suffering is the person carrying all that. So this is the process, like in my workbook that I'm talking about. It's for you. It has nothing, really, the other person could be on the moon. It's like you're going to do your piece to release those toxic feelings from your system, but also not just let them go, but really learn from them, you know, to really, because as I say, this work is transformative. And so to work through the experience that you've had and why it's been so difficult and all of it, and really come out on the other side feeling really empowered. And you still may be in your lawsuit, but you're in a different place. So I hope that makes sense, because that's a very important distinction, that it can be both and, but this work is offering you a spiritual and personal transformation.
Right.
Regardless of the other person.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, that's what's so good about it. They don't have the power. They can't, because if you wait for them, they have all the power.
Right.
And that doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, so what are some of your tips for someone who's like, you know, I mean, you hear about people who forgive people in a courtroom when they've done these horrible things. How do you think, like, people, what are your first tips, I guess, to getting to that point? Because I feel like that's such a huge thing to do, you know?
It's truly inspiring. I collect those stories because they inspire me. Heroic acts of forgiveness, and sometimes the hardest possible cases. You know, somebody's child was murdered, but they forgive. And I've really come to feel that when somebody goes through something that's so extraordinarily painful, sometimes it's easier, because sometimes what they've told me is, I just don't want any more pain. You know, it's been like, it's enough, and I don't need to hate anybody. I need to be angry at anybody, because they've just been taken to the edge of human pain. And so that is a phenomenon that I really admire those people. And sometimes it's the bigger things that somehow people seem to rise to the occasion. And then little everyday things are so hard for us. You know, it's just our human nature, I guess. So if you aspire to that, you know, like you want that to be kind of in that level of, I think this work does take you to that place where you realize a few things. And I don't want, these can sound very trite, but but not in a trite way, like where you really do get that people actually are doing the best they can, even though sometimes it's really not good. We can say that's really like poor behavior, but like for them and who they are and their history and they have their reasons and they're doing the best they can. So there are doorways like to, okay, well, I don't like it. It's not working. I don't want it in my life, but there can be compassion. And there's many of those that help. But the biggest one that I find is when you realize that if you do your work, you'll inevitably find the situation has brought, and I really, you have to be humble about this, but there's always enormous gifts for us in every situation, and sometimes the most painful ones. And when we receive those and we're really willing to let them in, because we resist that a lot, how could there be anything good about this? But if we really get that, wait, this is really teaching me something important, it gets a lot easier to forgive the other person. because you realize despite their intention and everything they've given me, I've received a huge gift out of this. But that's the opportunity. That's up to you, whether you're willing to look at that, contemplate, consider the possibility even. Some people aren't. How could you say there's anything good about this? But if you are willing to look at it, you always will find it. That's the amazing thing. And I say that as a cancer survivor. So, the little bit, I went through that when I had cancer. I think it's been now 12 years, but I was so angry, and this is the worst thing that ever happened. But eventually I did this work, and I realized, God, it had given me enormous gifts, really had. And that blew my mind. I didn't think that was possible to turn that around until I wasn't angry about it anymore. I had to, I'm sorry I had to go through that to get those lessons, but I did. And I got to a different level of acceptance and celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know with this group, we're always talking about gratitude and how, it's you have to look for the good in everything, right? And sometimes it can sound, like you said, so trite and so easy and so flippant, right? Like, well, what's the one good thing that came out of this, But there is something usually.
Yeah. And it's
do you feel like it takes a long time to find that thing, or do you feel
it's usually something pretty deep too, like in my case, just to say, it was like letting love in. Like I was good at managing life and doing all the things, but like actually receiving love, feeling it from the people around me, not just in a mechanical way, but that was huge. And that is what happened. That was one of many things. So it's usually something very deep. Sometimes it may even sound simple when you say it, but it's not. It's something that really changes your life if you open to it. And I think it requires us to slow down. It requires some humility to see it. But if you're asking and if you want to find it, you will, because it's right there. And that's like I say, we have blind spots. So that's why sometimes it does help to have a coach or somebody who can help you. But it's usually the thing we most need. I had this one client, just to give you an example of this, who was going through a terrible divorce. Her husband was being really controlling. Some months he'd give her this much money, and then the next, whatever he wanted. He wasn't playing by the rules, shall we say. And she had to give up on mediation, but she decided to do forgiveness work. And in that work, she realized that she had really let him dominate everything, the whole marriage. And she was just completely secondary, subservient. And she really looked at that, and she said, and she really kind of came back to herself, like she had never had her own voice. She had never taken her power in any way. And she just turned a corner, no more, I'm claiming my life, as basically. And she came back to the next week and had this huge breakthrough. And she said, I realized, that first of all, she's claiming her life and her dreams and what she wants. But secondly, that he had been a teacher in some profound way, because through this terrible experience, it brought her to that realization that she had to go there. It's not handed to you on a silver platter. She had to dig to look at that, but it changed her life. And within a short time, she'd always had this dream of she played music and she wanted to perform, and she started doing it, and she was really good. And it was just beautiful to watch her blossom, and it happened quickly so this is the kind of thing I see. It's life-changing for people in really positive ways. It's kind of the phoenix rising, out of the ashes.
Right. It's it can change overnight once you've kind of done the work almost. So
exactly. It can change quickly. And isn't that, that's you talk about the celebration, and then you celebrate.
Right, exactly. Well, so you talk about forgiveness in terms of what we're conscious of, right? A bad relationship, maybe someone who's hurt you.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's like sawing going on in the background. Is there, because we talk a lot about like subconscious paradigms, right? Where maybe we have repressed something that happened in our past. Is there any time that maybe we need to forgive someone and we don't even like know that we need to?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's actually very right on. Almost always the person we start out like, okay, I'm going to forgive my ex, it's not, it almost always does what we find, like with that woman, that was a pattern in her life that went back into, her family childhood of being, not having the voice and being disempowered. And that was the way she was brought up. And it's almost, I mean, I want to say like universal, that the thing we're struggling with currently is really the tip of the iceberg, and it's part of a pattern. And so part of the work is indeed to go back to the root and do the healing of the core wounding. That's where it gets really powerful. Because
Is that typically like something that happened, excuse me, with your parents, or is that something that maybe happened and you didn't forgive yourself, or what do you think is the typical?
Usually it starts out in early childhood, like before we're 7, the deep wounding. We develop the core wounds. I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me, I don't believe, whatever it is. And it's something there's something that's happened. Maybe our parents, were neglectful or abusive or whatever, and we made these conclusions as children. So we develop these patterns based on the core wounding, then we reenact in our relationships as we grow up. So ultimately, there's always the time late when you realize that, wow, I've been, I thought that I wasn't good enough, and then you realize that really wasn't what it was. My mom was just really busy, and she, whatever. And you kind of see it through adult eyes instead of 4-year-old eyes or 7-year-old eyes. Then you have to forgive yourself. But it's not that hard to do, because you were just a kid. How did you know? But you do have to forgive yourself, because you created a whole identity that was based on something erroneous. And so that is part of the work. But there's other aspects too, where, we have to forgive the other person, but we have to forgive ourselves as well. And self-forgiveness is, in my opinion, usually the hardest and the most important, because even if we're very hard on the other person, we're usually hardest on ourselves, really. And so when we come to that, it's part of every process. It's one of the 12 steps is also to forgive ourselves, because until we do that, it's not really complete.
Right. It's almost like you have to do the work on you before you can, how they say that with relationships, kind of, right? Like
you have to do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have your forgiveness workbook, which we'll definitely put a link to, but maybe you can talk about the first, 3 or 4 or something, steps or something that we can kind of get started with, do you think?
Sure, happy to. The beginning steps, first of all, the first part of the workbook really talks about what forgiveness is and what it's not, and all the misconceptions, because I want people to just have their head clear and not be, because that can get in the way if we're confused about what it is and what it's not. Like, does it mean I'm excusing them if I forgive them? And so all of that's addressed in the first half of the book. So that's the first thing, is just get clear. Then get clear, secondly, on who you want to forgive and for what, which may sound very simple, but people often, have several people they want to forgive, and it gets muddled. And I really always recommend pick one, do one at a time, so you can really focus and don't try to forgive like your whole family at once, kind of a thing. So that's the second thing. And then, it's like you start where you are. So what happened? If I just said, well, tell me what happened. I want to hear the story. And so that's the step. The next step is to write it down and get it all out. It's a purge, it's cathartic, but it's important that, you're naming it all. And so that is one of the very, very early steps. And that's where a few weeks we're going to do a retreat, and everybody's asked to do that before they arrive. So when they come, here's my story, here's what happened, and we hit the ground running. So that's how you get started. And then the book kind of gives you steps of how to work with that story and begin to unravel, peel off the layers and go into it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because for my specific legal situation, we filed a complaint with the real estate board or whoever it was. So I had to put together all the complaint, and I did feel like it was pretty cathartic, because I got to put all my evidence together, and
yes,
even though they may not do anything with it, it's like I got to put it together and succinct all of my details, and so I can see how that is so true.
It's like naming it, getting it said. It's really important. It's really it's a powerful step of because ultimately you want to release it and you don't want to be carrying it around anymore. So getting it out on paper, it's a step. And then of course, we have people share it and talk about it too. And, and so you can do it also express it in those other ways, but getting it out, getting it down, it's good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I think we forget about that. It's like I'm always encouraging gratitude journal writing. And I think you just think yeah, I'm grateful, right? It's the same thing, but it's it's not the act of actually doing it and getting it out onto paper,
And we do get to gratitude in the process. In fact, it's one of my definitions. People, well, how do you know if you've forgiven? And I said, well, if you feel grateful for what happened, you have forgiven. If you can say, I'm grateful.
Wow, that's actually good.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge question. Yeah. How do you know that you've forgiven?
If you can laugh about it, you've forgiven.
You can laugh about it. Wow. Yeah, that's so good.
That's later. I really believe in gratitude. In fact, you probably know this very well, but the studies of positive psychology show that the happiest people practice two things: gratitude and forgiveness.
Well, there you go. These two together.
But I also believe you have to receive the gift before you can't rush gratitude. I mean, there's always plenty to be grateful for. And I love practicing it every day. But in this bigger sense, with the work that you would do in here, I want you to really get that gift. And when you receive it, then it's almost organic. God, I'm so grateful. Like that woman, she's so grateful. She found her dream. She found her voice. She truly was grateful. And,
right.
So that's a beautiful thing.
And sometimes it can probably take a few weeks or months or even years to understand what came out of it, right?
I mean, this process, being a 12-step process, is usually if I'm, we do it in a weekend, a long weekend, or I'll do it in a few months with people on weekly sessions. But so it's usually it's not years, but it could take somebody. Everybody moves at their own pace. But when they're ready, it usually can happen in months.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was really curious to talk to you about is I know that forgiveness can make us feel good and lighter and airy and whatnot, but I wanted to really focus on your health, because I feel like we all want to feel happy and stuff, but do you think that forgiveness can truly affect our health? You talked about how maybe you had your health scare, and so we're all trying to prevent against stuff like that. Do you think that this is a big piece of that puzzle?
I do, and there's a lot of commentary. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the scientific evidence of it, but definitely a lot has been written about how unforgiveness, not forgiving, can cause cancer, can cause health damages. Carrying grudges increases the chance of stroke and heart attack. Just carrying grudges. So not forgiving, carrying that, like I say, that energy is really toxic. We don't realize it because it's so common, but it's really bad for us. And how it's going to play out for any particular person, I mean, that's very individual. But when we can, in a very genuine way, release it and lighten, not carry that energy. It's yes, I think very good preventative medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you saw the research, there's so much research on how toxic it is to carry around anger. I mean, nobody would want to touch it. It's like, it's really damaging. But
Right. Well,
we take it for granted.
right.
Yeah, and that has to shift.
Well, and bringing it back to the whole of we talk a lot about the law of attraction and the law of vibration, and how if you are upset and carrying around that grudge, right, you're going to be attracting that same energy back to you, right?
Right. It's heavy energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so crazy. And I'm so glad you said that about what forgiveness feels like, because I think now that we kind of know that, I just feel like that is so telling, right? It's like, okay, if I can't laugh about it yet, I've got to keep working on this.
It's liberating. It's like we're free. It's like one of the ways I think about it is before we forgive, it's like we're in almost like a prison cell. And there's a famous quote about how we're like in the prison cell, and we realize we have the key to the cell and everything. But it's true. We're like locked in this little prison of our own story, basically. Yeah. And then when we forgive, it's liberating and we're free of it. And it's an amazing feeling. Oh. It is. It really is.
That's so good. Yeah. Well, I'm definitely aware of your time. I know we've been chatting for a little while. Is there anything else like you'd want to leave people with so that they'd walk away, thinking, yeah, forgiveness is something I really need to do?
Well, I hope that is the case. And I just want to say your questions were great. And I appreciate the depth of the conversation. I feel like we dropped into the meat of the situation, what forgiveness is and what it offers. And I just encourage anybody, not from I never want somebody to say, oh, you should forgive and you're bad if you don't, because that's not helpful at all. But just in a positive way to realize that if you're suffering, it is, I always say, it's, how could I say, we actually do cause our own suffering. That's what's really sad. So it means it's unnecessary. And even though it's hard to see that, when you do this work, you start realizing the ways that we have at least contributed. Other people contribute too, of course, but that we're contributing it. We're holding it in place, and we don't have to. So I really encourage people, learn these steps so that you can unhook yourself and you don't have to stay stuck in a difficult situation, because it's not necessary. This is like, we have technology now to shift and to have much more positive states than holding that energy.
Oh, that's so good. Well, so if people want to learn more about you, where can they go to kind of find you?
Website's the best place, The Path of Forgiveness. It's all those words, thepathofforgiveness.com.
Okay, awesome.
You can post that, and then you'll find there's tools, there's free meditation videos, and I'm all the time trying to put more content on there just to get, and all of our events, of course, are posted there. And I do, and it's a free offering every Wednesday morning, a meditation group online with Zoom. It started during the quarantine, but we have a great group that's not letting me stop anytime soon. And I love it too. So every Wednesday morning, and anybody is free to join us. And it's really like an oasis in the middle of life. It's like just an hour of peace with it, whatever's going on. So I welcome you all to that. And it's been really lovely being with you. And I appreciate
thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So I'll stop the recording and then we'll keep talking, but thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.